It starts in moments so small, no one else even notices them. You're a child, sitting in a quiet room, and before anyone says a word, you already feel it. The shift, the change in temperature, the breath someone holds for half a second too long. You felt the room before you understood the words. The sigh that wasn't loud, the silence that wasn't accidental, the tension that moved across the floor like a shadow only you could see. Other kids listened to what people said. You listened to everything people didn't say. Your heart picked up cues your mind was too young to name. A tightening jaw, a flat, "I'm fine," a smile that didn't reach the eyes, and you learned, long before you had language for it, that you experienced the world deeper than the people around you. Not because you wanted to, but because you had to. And that's where the loneliness began. Not when people left you, but when you started feeling everything they didn't. Being too emotional doesn't sound like a wound, but for you, it became a quiet burden. You became the child who carried the moods of the entire room, the one who sensed disappointment before it was spoken, the one who noticed pain in others long before anyone noticed yours. You absorbed everyone, but no one absorbed you. You understood people with a depth that felt natural, but the world didn't understand you back. And slowly, sensitivity stopped being a gift. It became a language only you could speak, a depth only you could feel, a place where connection became confusion, and emotional intelligence became emotional isolation. Here is the paradox no one warned you about. The thing that made you sensitive is the same thing that made you lonely. The depth that let you read others made you unreadable to them. Your awareness connected you to the world, but separated you from people. You felt too much in a world that learned to feel less. And you grew up carrying emotions no one else could see. Not because you were weak, but because you were wired to feel what others avoided. You didn't wake up one day too sensitive. You became sensitive because the world around you demanded it. As a child, you learned to feel everything before it happened. A raised eyebrow, a shift in someone's breathing, the way a room suddenly went quiet for reasons no one else noticed. Your emotional vigilance wasn't a personality trait, it was survival. You picked up micro expressions like other kids picked up toys. You read tone the way others read books. You listened to silence as if it was speaking directly to you. And without realizing it, your nervous system turned into an antenna, always scanning, always sensing, always preparing. What felt like empathy was often self-protection. Here's the part no one tells the emotionally intelligent child. Knowing too much, feeling too much, understanding too much becomes a curse when you're too young to carry it. You saw things others overlooked. You felt things others ignored. You sensed tension before the adults in the room even admitted it existed. You were emotionally years ahead of the people meant to guide you. And with that knowledge came a quiet truth you didn't have the language for yet. I see the world differently. I feel things other people don't. And instead of creating connection, it created distance. Because being aware in a world that avoids awareness is a lonely place to grow up. What adults called maturity was often hypervigilance. What people praised as being wise beyond your years was anticipatory grief, feeling the break before it happened. What they described as being caring was emotional responsibility, believing you had to fix pain you didn't cause. These weren't personality traits. They were trauma responses wearing polite names. You didn't grow into them. You defended yourself with them. There's always a moment, small, quiet, forgettable to everyone but you, when you realize your sensitivity isn't normal. You notice things no one else notices. You feel alone in the middle of conversations. You become the emotional adult in a room full of emotional children. And the isolation doesn't begin when people leave. It begins when you sense too much to belong. When your depth becomes the very thing that sets you apart. You didn't become the child who felt too much by accident. Your nervous system was shaped by the people who raised you. Attachment researchers John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth discovered something simple but devastating. Children feel exactly as deeply as their environment forces them to. If your caregivers were unpredictable, warm one moment, distant the next, your body adapted. When your emotions weren't mirrored, you learned to magnify them inside yourself. When the adults around you didn't notice their own feelings, you learned to notice everyone's. You became hyper-attuned because the alternative felt dangerous. Your depth didn't come from sensitivity alone. It came from survival. Your nervous system grew sharp in the places theirs were dull. Science explains what your childhood could not. An overactive amygdala makes emotional signals feel louder than they should. Heightened interoception makes the body speak in bold print. Tight chest, fluttering stomach, sudden heaviness in your shoulders. These sensations aren't dramatic, they're neurological. When a child grows up in emotional uncertainty, the brain learns one rule: scan everything, and once the brain learns vigilance, it never fully relaxes, even in safe rooms, even with kind people, even when nothing is wrong. Your body remembers environments you no longer live in. Schema therapy gives your experience a name, not to label you, but to free you. Emotional deprivation, schema. The child feels more than the adults can respond to, so the child begins to hold everything alone. Defectiveness, schema. You start believing something is wrong with you simply because you feel deeply. Responsibility and over-control, schema. You become the emotional caretaker, the one who senses pain before it's spoken and carries burdens you never chose. These schemas don't form because you were weak. They form because you were left holding emotions the adults couldn't handle. There is a line that captures children like you. The most sensitive hearts feel the world twice, first through themselves, then through others. You grew up feeling the world twice, and that double weight shaped everything: your silence, your depth, your loneliness, your wisdom. Carl Jung said that the places where we are most wounded often become the places where we see the world most clearly. Your sensitivity wasn't the wound. Feeling alone in it was. You don't outgrow this kind of childhood. You carry it with you, quietly, invisibly, into every room you enter. It shows up not as memories, but as habits, fears, instincts, and patterns you never consciously chose. As an adult, you might still read tone shifts like warnings. You might notice the pause before someone answers, the tightness in their voice, the way their eyes drift for half a second too long. Your mind scans for missteps you never made. Silence feels like danger. A delayed reply feels like abandonment. A cold expression feels like guilt. Even when you've done nothing wrong, you live 1 second ahead of the present, always anticipating. always decoding, always preparing. You might have empathy that feels like a superpower until it isn't. You sense other people's sadness before they speak. You carry their stress like it's your own. You feel responsible for fixing what you didn't break. And while this makes you comforting to others, it leaves you exhausted, drained, overstretched. You become the emotional sponge in every relationship, the one who feels too much, cares too much, gives too much. You might feel alone even when you're loved, not because people don't care, but because your emotional world runs deeper than most can understand. Joy feels unfamiliar. Happiness feels fragile. You wait for the moment everything breaks, because emotional safety never lasted long in childhood. You brace for the shoe to drop, even in moments that should feel peaceful. You might replay conversations long after they end. Did I upset them? Did I misunderstand? Did their tone change? Your mind becomes a loop of possibilities, not because you're insecure, but because your nervous system is trained to look for storms before they form. You might give love beautifully, but struggle to receive it. Depth makes you compassionate, but it also makes you afraid. You fear being too much. You fear being misunderstood. You fear letting someone close enough to see how much you feel. So you stay guarded, even when your heart is open. And underneath all of it lives one quiet, painful truth. I understand everyone, but no one understands me. Because the same sensitivity that made you perceptive as a child still sets you apart as an adult. You feel the world in a way most people never will. And that depth, while beautiful, can feel unbearably lonely. There is a price for feeling this much. A cost no one sees because it doesn't show up on your skin. It shows up in your silence. It begins with the weight of constant awareness. You become the emotional caretaker in every room you enter. The one who notices the sigh, the shift in posture, the disappointment hiding behind someone's "I'm fine." You carry emotional labor that no one assigned you, and emotional responsibility that no one acknowledges. You become the one who absorbs the tension, smooths the edges, holds the atmosphere together. But in that role, you're alone. Because no one asks what you felt while you were busy feeling everything else. There is also a biological toll, the kind the body remembers long after the mind forgets. Your nervous system stays on high alert, wired for danger that never arrives, scanning emotional horizons that never stop shifting. Your body becomes a storage unit for feelings that had nowhere else to go. Tight shoulders, stomach knots, chest heaviness, headaches that appear for no reason. This is what happens when emotions live in the body because they had no safe place in childhood. And beneath all of this lives a different kind of loneliness, an existential one. A loneliness that comes not from being without people, but from being unable to share the depth of what you feel. Kierkegaard called despair the sickness of a self that cannot express itself. Jung called it the ache of a soul split between what it feels and what it shows. For the sensitive child, this ache becomes a quiet grief that follows them into adulthood. The grief of being the one who notices what others never see. The grief of never being fully understood, even by people who love you. The grief of a childhood spent without emotional companionship, surrounded by others, yet emotionally alone. It's the grief of a deep heart that never found a deep mirror. Sensitive children don't grow up alone because they want to. They grow up alone because of the emotional roles they were forced into. They become the emotional antenna of the house. The child who sensed unhappiness before it erupted, who felt tension before anyone spoke, who monitored emotional weather like survival. Adults didn't say, "It's your job to hold the family together," but the child felt it anyway. Emotional responsibility was assigned quietly, implicitly, unconsciously. Then comes the emotional mismatch. The child feels deeply, but the adults don't. The child notices subtleties the adults dismiss. The child feels pain the adults minimize. The child reads emotions the adults cannot name. This mismatch creates a gap, and inside that gap, isolation grows. Because the world is built for the numb, not the aware. Children who feel deeply are called dramatic, too sensitive, too emotional, too much. They are misunderstood not because they're flawed, but because they're seeing what others refuse to see. So they withdraw. They retreat into inner worlds. They learn to rely on themselves because no one seems capable of meeting them where they are. And here lies the core truth, the truth most sensitive adults never hear. Your loneliness was never because you lacked connection. It was because you carried too much connection for everyone else. You weren't empty. You were overflowing. And no one knew how to hold what you held. Healing begins the moment you stop arguing with your own depth. For years, you've been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too much. So you learned to doubt what you feel, to shrink your reactions, to gaslight your own intuition. But sensitivity is not fragility. It is intelligence. It is awareness. It is the nervous system saying, "I see what others overlook." The first step is simply witnessing yourself without judgment, noticing the depth, acknowledging the patterns, letting your feelings exist without apologizing for them. Then comes the nervous system, the part of you that never got to relax. Learning safety is not a mindset, it is a practice. Breathing that says, "I am safe now." Pauses that say, "I don't need to scan anymore." Slowing down long enough to hear your body again instead of overriding it. This is interoceptive trust. Trusting the signals inside you instead of the emotional chaos around you. And slowly, you build boundaries the kind you should have learned as a child. You whisper to yourself, "Their feelings are not my responsibility." You stop rescuing everyone. You stop absorbing everyone's sadness. You stop carrying storms that were never yours, and then something shifts. Your inner voice returns. You hear your own needs, your own discomfort, your own truth, and for the first time, you listen. This is the unlearning. This is the beginning of coming home to yourself. Healing is not becoming someone new. It is remembering the child you were before the world overwhelmed you. Inner child work begins with a single, quiet truth. I deserved softer love. You did. You deserved gentleness. You deserved someone who sat with your feelings instead of handing you theirs. You deserve safety in a world that gave you responsibility instead. So now, as an adult, you offer that softness to yourself. You begin choosing tenderness, not as weakness, but as power. Sensitivity becomes the thing that lets you love deeply, create honestly, connect courageously. Your emotional depth stops being a burden and becomes the reason people feel safe with you. Let this truth land. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung, you are not doomed to repeat the past. You are learning to rewrite it. So here is your closing truth. You felt too much, but you were never too much. You grew up alone, but you do not have to stay there. You finally get to belong, first to yourself, then to the people who can meet you where you are. And if any part of this resonated with you, if you felt seen, understood, or less alone, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need these words tonight. The YouTube algorithm rarely favors new creators, so your engagement is what helps this message reach the people who need it most. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling deeply. You're not alone anymore.